Sophie froze mid-step on the rickety porch, the $5 bill crumpled in her small fist as the German shepherd's eyes locked with hers, not with fear, but recognition. What she'd thought was a broken, abandoned animal suddenly stood at attention like a soldier awaiting orders. Martha gasped behind her, dropping the grocery bag she'd been carrying, cans of beans rolling across weathered floorboards. "Lord have mercy," she whispered, one hand clutching her necklace, the other reaching for her granddaughter. "Bill, come quick." The dog's scarred face and matted fur couldn't hide what Sophie's grandfather saw immediately. The unmistakable bearing of a trained canine officer, the same disciplined stance he'd witnessed countless times during his 30 years of service before being pushed into retirement. "Get inside, Sophie," Bill commanded, his voice steady despite his trembling hands. "That's not just any stray you've brought home." What happened to this dog? And who would go to such lengths to discard a highly trained police canine worth thousands as a worthless $5 mutt? Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. The small town of Millbrook, Georgia had seen better days. Once prosperous family farms now struggled against corporate agriculture, and the main street boasted more vacant storefronts than businesses. The Peterson family farm sat 3 miles outside town, 50 acres of peach orchards and cornfields that had been in Bill Anderson's family for 4 generations. Sophie Peterson had come to live with her grandparents 2 years ago after losing her parents in a highway accident. At 10 years old, she carried herself with the quiet dignity of someone who had already faced life's harshest lessons. Small for her age, with honey blonde hair usually pulled into practical braids, Sophie possessed a determination that reminded Bill of his late daughter. "She needs something to care about," Martha had whispered to Bill countless times as they watched their granddaughter drift through days without the spark that once lit her eyes. Sophie performed her chores dutifully, earned straight A's and never complained, but joy had become a stranger to her. Bill and Martha Anderson weren't faring much better. At 67, Bill's body carried the aches of decades of physical labor and his earlier career in law enforcement, a past he rarely discussed. His weathered hands bore calluses from farm work, his face lined with worry over mounting bills and an uncertain future. The mortgage payment had been late twice this year, and the medical bills from Martha's heart surgery last fall loomed like thunderclouds. Martha, at 65, maintained the quiet strength that had sustained their 43 years of marriage. She stretched every dollar at the grocery store, mended clothes until they were more patch than original fabric, and sold her famous peach preserves at the Sunday farmers market. Her gray-streaked auburn hair framed a face that smiled easily despite their circumstances. The Andersons' modest 2-story farmhouse had seen better days. Peeling paint on the wraparound porch, a roof that leaked during heavy rains, and appliances from a bygone era that Martha kept running through sheer determination. The barn, once red and proud, had faded to the color of rust, housing their ancient tractor and providing shelter for 2 milk cows and a small flock of chickens. This was the world Sophie had brought the injured German shepherd into, a place where $5 represented a significant investment, not a casual expenditure. As Bill secured the dog in the barn that first night, keeping a cautious distance from the animal's wary eyes, he couldn't shake the feeling that their lives had just changed irrevocably. "You think we're doing right by her, letting her keep him?" Martha asked later that night, her voice low as they sat at their kitchen table, going over bills by lamplight. Bill stared out the window toward the barn, where Sophie had insisted on reading bedtime stories to the frightened animal. "I don't know, Martha," he answered honestly, "but that child hasn't shown interest in anything since we lost James and Rebecca. Whatever that dog is, and he's something more than what he seems, he's woken something in our girl." Sophie named him Max. She didn't know why, The name simply came to her as she sat beside the trembling German shepherd that first night in the barn, her flashlight illuminating the pages of Charlotte's Web as she read aloud. The dog hadn't eaten the food she'd placed nearby, hadn't moved from his corner, but his eyes, amber and intelligent, never left her face. "You're safe now, Max," she whispered as she closed the book. "I promise." 3 days passed with little change. Max remained in his corner of the barn, accepting water but barely touching the food Martha prepared. Good farm food that they could ill afford to waste. The dog's ribs showed through his dull coat, and the limp in his right hind leg seemed worse when he occasionally shifted position. On the 4th morning, Bill found Sophie asleep in the hay beside Max, her small hand resting inches from the dog's scarred muzzle. The German shepherd's eyes opened immediately, tracking Bill's every movement with military precision. "Sophie," Bill said softly, keeping his distance, "your grandmother's got breakfast ready." Sophie stirred, rubbing sleep from her eyes. "He's still scared, Grandpa," she said, her voice heavy with disappointment. "I don't think he trusts us yet." Bill studied the dog with growing certainty. "It's not about trust, Sophie. That dog is waiting for something. Commands, maybe." After breakfast, Dr. Eleanor Wright arrived in her battered pickup truck. The town's only veterinarian for 30 years, Eleanor had delivered countless foals, calves, and kittens in Millbrook. Her silver hair was cut practically short, her weathered face kind but no nonsense. "So this is our $5 dog," she said, kneeling slowly beside Max, who remained unnaturally still as she examined him. "Malnourished? Dehydrated?" "This leg's been broken and healed poorly." Her experienced hands moved gently over the dog's body. "Someone beat this animal, Bill. Repeatedly." Sophie's eyes filled with tears. "Who would do that?" "Some folks don't deserve the air they breathe," Eleanor replied, not sugarcoating for the child's benefit. "He's got old scars. Looks like he might have been in some kind of accident too, but he's strong. Good breeding." "Will he get better?" Sophie asked. "With proper care, yes." Eleanor handed Bill a bottle of antibiotics. "These are samples, no charge. He needs these twice daily with food." She looked pointedly at the Andersons, understanding their financial situation. "I can set up a payment plan for anything else he needs." After the vet left, Sophie sat cross-legged near Max, careful to maintain the distance he seemed to need. "You heard Dr. Wright," she told him seriously. "You need to eat, to take your medicine. It's for your own good." To everyone's surprise, Max inched forward and cautiously ate from the bowl Sophie placed before him. News of Sophie's $5 dog spread quickly through Millbrook. The reactions were mixed. Some, like Pastor Davis, praised Sophie's compassion. "The good book says a righteous man regards the life of his beast," he told Martha after Sunday service. "That child has a generous heart." Others were less supportive. "Waste of money and food," declared Harold Jenkins at the feed store when Bill purchased the cheapest dog food available. "German shepherds eat like horses. You folks can barely keep yourselves fed." "We manage just fine," Bill replied stiffly, his pride wounded but his voice steady. Whispers followed Sophie at school. "My dad says that dog's probably dangerous," said Tommy Richards during lunch period. "Says you can't trust a dog that's been mistreated. Might snap and bite your face off." Sophie ignored them, spending her recesses writing stories about Max in her notebook. Tales of a brave dog who saved people from burning buildings and caught bad guys. "He's a hero," she told her skeptical classmates. "He's just forgotten it for a while." A week after Max's arrival, something changed. Sophie was sitting in the barn, doing her homework and chatting to Max as if he understood every word. "Grandma says if you keep eating well, you can come in the house soon, but you have to promise not to chase Mittens. She's old and cranky, but she was here first." The ancient radio on the barn shelf, usually tuned to the weather forecast for farmers, crackled with the sound of the hourly news. Millbrook County Sheriff's Department announced an increase in patrols following reports of drug activity near the old Miller property. Max's transformation was instant and startling. His ears snapped forward, his posture straightened despite his injured leg, and his eyes focused with laser intensity on the radio. He rose shakily to his feet and stood at attention, as if awaiting orders. "Max?" Sophie whispered, stunned by the change. "What's wrong?" The dog looked at her with such intelligence that Sophie felt a chill run down her spine. This wasn't the behavior of an ordinary pet. This was something else entirely. That evening, Sophie demonstrated Max's reaction to the radio for her grandparents. Bill watched with narrowed eyes as the German Shepherd responded to police terminology with unmistakable recognition. "He's trained," Bill said finally. "Professional training. Military or police." "Why would someone dump a police dog?" Martha asked, her hand pressed against her heart. "That's what worries me," Bill replied, his expression grim. "Someone went to a lot of trouble to hide what this dog is." Question is, why? The following morning, Martha opened the kitchen door to find Max sitting on the porch, his posture alert but unthreatening. Sophie gasped with delight. "He came out of the barn by himself." "Well, I suppose he can come in for breakfast," Martha said cautiously, "but just this once." Just this once became a regular occurrence. Max proved himself impeccably behaved in the house, never jumping on furniture, never begging at the table, responding to basic commands with military precision. His health improved steadily under Sophie's devoted care. The limp remained, but his coat began to shine again, and the haunted look in his eyes gradually faded. 2 weeks after Max's arrival, Sophie took him for his first walk into town. She'd fashioned a leash from old rope, unnecessary given Max's perfect heel, but required by Millbrook's ordinances. They made an odd pair, the small girl and the large dog moving in perfect sync down Main Street. Their first stop was Pearson's General Store, where Sophie planned to spend her carefully saved allowance on a proper dog collar. As they approached the store, a sleek black SUV pulled up to the curb. The man who emerged was a stranger to Sophie, tall and expensively dressed, with perfectly styled dark hair and a smile that never reached his cold eyes. "Well, look at this handsome fellow," the man said, approaching Sophie and Max with an outstretched hand. "What's his name?" Before Sophie could answer, Max's demeanor transformed completely. A low, threatening growl rumbled from his chest. His ears flattened against his head, and he positioned himself protectively in front of Sophie. "I'm sorry," Sophie apologized, startled by the reaction. He's never done that before. The man withdrew his hand slowly, his smile unchanged but his eyes calculating. "No need to apologize. Some dogs are particular about strangers." He straightened his designer jacket. "Frank Miller," he introduced himself. "I've recently moved back to take over my late uncle's property. You must be one of the local children." "Sophie Peterson," she replied automatically, struggling to control Max, who continued to growl softly. "We live at Anderson Farms." "Anderson?" Frank's eyebrows raised slightly. "Any relation to William Anderson?" "He's my grandfather." Something flickered across Frank's face. Recognition, calculation, and something darker. "Well, you tell your grandfather that Frank Miller says hello. We're practically neighbors now. I've bought the old Davis property that borders your farm." As Frank walked away, Max gradually relaxed, but his eyes never left the man until he disappeared into the bank across the street. Later that evening, Sophie recounted the strange encounter to her grandparents. Bill's reaction was unexpected and disturbing. The color drained from his face, and his hands trembled slightly as he set down his coffee cup. Miller, he repeated. You're sure that was his name? Frank Miller? Yes, Grandpa. He said to tell you hello. Do you know him? Bill and Martha exchanged a look heavy with unspoken meaning. I might have, Bill said carefully. A long time ago. Sophie, I want you to stay away from that man, and be careful with Max around him. But why? Max was the one who didn't like him. Smart dog, Bill muttered, rising from the table and walking to the window, staring out toward the property line they apparently now shared with Frank Miller. Martha, we need to talk. Sophie, why don't you take Max out for his evening walk? Sophie complied, but her mind raced with questions. As they walked down the long driveway, she knelt beside Max. What is it, boy? What do you know about that man that scared Grandpa so much? Max's intelligent eyes met hers, full of secrets he couldn't share. That night, Bill Anderson couldn't sleep. He sat on the porch swing, the ancient wood creaking beneath him, a forgotten cup of coffee growing cold in his hands. The moon cast long shadows across the farmland, land his grandfather had purchased after returning from World War II, land that might not stay in the family much longer if things didn't improve. You should come to bed, Martha said softly, appearing in the doorway, wrapped in her faded housecoat. Frank Miller, Bill said, still staring into the darkness. After all these years. Martha settled beside him on the swing, her weight familiar and comforting. Are you sure it's the same man? Could be a coincidence. Bill shook his head. No such thing as coincidences in my line of work. Former line of work, Martha corrected gently. You've been a farmer longer than you were a police officer, Bill. He turned to face her, his expression grave in the moonlight. That dog knows something, Martha. The way Sophie described his reaction, a trained K-9 doesn't respond like that to just anyone. You think this Miller fellow is connected to Max's past? To how he ended up abandoned and injured? I think, Bill said carefully, that we need to be very cautious. I'm going to make some calls tomorrow. Inside the house, Sophie lay awake in her small bedroom under the eaves, Max curled on the rug beside her bed. She'd heard snippets of her grandparents' conversation through the partially open window. Something about her grandfather's former line of work confused her. As far as she knew, he had always been a farmer. What secrets are you keeping, Max? She whispered to the dog, who lifted his head at the sound of her voice. And what secrets is Grandpa keeping? The next morning, after Sophie left for school, Bill placed a call to an old friend. Samuel Wilson had retired from the Millbrook County Sheriff's Department 5 years before Bill, and the two had maintained a cautious friendship bound by their shared past. Sam, it's Bill Anderson. I need to ask you something off the record. There was a pause on the line. Been a while, Bill. Everything all right out at the farm? Not sure yet. My granddaughter found a dog, a German Shepherd, injured, abandoned. But this dog has training, Sam. Professional training. Lots of people train their German Shepherds, Bill. Not like this. He responds to police radio chatter. Stands at attention. Perfect heel without commands. And yesterday, he had a very specific reaction to a man named Frank Miller. The silence on the other end stretched long enough that Bill thought they'd been disconnected. Finally, Sam spoke, his voice lower. Frank Miller is back in Millbrook? Apparently bought the old Davis property bordering my farm. Another long pause. I'll be over in 20 minutes. True to his word, Sam's pickup truck rolled up the driveway exactly 20 minutes later. At 70, Sam Wilson remained imposing, 6'2" with shoulders like a bull, though his once black hair had turned snow white. He had been one of the county's first K-9 handlers before rising through the ranks to detective. Bill met him on the porch, and the two men shared a brisk handshake that carried the weight of their complicated history. Where's the dog? Sam asked without preamble. In the barn? Sophie's been keeping him there while she's at school, coming along nicely, but still skittish. As they crossed the yard, Bill filled Sam in on Max's arrival and subsequent behavior. The old barn door creaked as they entered, dust motes dancing in the shafts of sunlight from the high windows. Max was curled on a bed of clean straw, but he rose immediately at their entrance, eyes alert and wary. Sam gave a low whistle. Good-looking animal. Purebred, I'd guess. He approached slowly, speaking in a low, commanding voice. Sits. Max sat immediately. Platz. The dog lay down. Sam turned to Bill, his expression grave. That's not just any training, Bill. That's specialized canine training, German commands, and look at the notch in his left ear. That's not an injury. That's a deliberate marking system used by some canine trainers. Bill's suspicions deepened. You think he's a police dog? How would he end up abandoned on some backwoods property? That's the million-dollar question. Sam knelt beside Max, gently examining him. He's been through hell, whatever happened. These scars aren't all from abuse. Some look like blast injuries, maybe a car accident. He pointed to a particularly prominent scar on Max's side, and this could be a bullet graze. Bill felt a chill run down his spine. You think someone tried to kill him? I think, Sam said, standing with a groan as his knees protested, that we need to check missing canine reports, and I think you need to be very careful where Frank Miller is concerned. After Sam left, promising to make discreet inquiries, Bill sat with Max in the barn. The dog watched him with those intelligent eyes that seemed to hold the answers to questions Bill was afraid to ask. You and I, Bill told the dog quietly, we're both keeping secrets, aren't we? When Sophie returned from school that afternoon, she found her grandfather and Max sitting together in companionable silence, something that surprised her. You're making friends, she exclaimed, dropping her backpack on a hay bale. Just getting acquainted, Bill replied, rising stiffly. How was school? Boring. But I got an A on my history test. She knelt beside Max, scratching behind his ears. Has he been good? Perfect gentleman. Had a visitor today, my old friend Sam Wilson. He used to work with police dogs. Thinks Max might have been one. Sophie's eyes widened. A real police dog? Like the ones that catch bad guys? Bill nodded, watching her reaction carefully. It would explain his training, his responses to certain things. That's why he didn't like Mr. Miller, Sophie concluded, excited by this development. Maybe Max saw him do something bad. Bill's expression darkened. Sophie, I need you to promise me something. I want you to stay away from Frank Miller. And if he ever comes around asking about Max, you tell me or your grandmother immediately. Sophie frowned at her grandfather's serious tone. Is Mr. Miller a bad person, Grandpa? Bill chose his words carefully. Let's just say I have concerns about his character. Promise me, Sophie. I promise. She looked down at Max, who was watching their exchange with attentive eyes. Does this mean we have to give Max back to the police? The question hung in the air, painful in its simplicity. Bill sighed. We don't know where he came from yet, or if anyone's looking for him. For now, he's still your dog. Relief washed over Sophie's face. She threw her arms around her grandfather's waist. Thank you. I'll take even better care of him now that I know he's special. Bill returned her hug, his eyes meeting Max's over her head. He's special, all right. The following day, Bill drove into town to meet Sam at the small diner on Main Street. The lunch crowd had thinned, leaving them relative privacy in a back booth. Sam slid a manila folder across the table. Had to call in some favors, he said, keeping his voice low. There have been 3 canine officers reported missing or killed in action within a 200-mile radius in the past year. Bill opened the folder, scanning the information inside. Any matches to our boy? Maybe. Sam tapped a photograph of a handsome German shepherd standing proudly beside a young officer. This one was reported killed in action during a drug bust gone bad 8 months ago. Handler was critically injured. Dog's body was never recovered from the scene. Bill studied the photograph. The dog looked similar to Max, but without distinguishing marks, it was hard to be certain. What was his name? Ranger, specialized in narcotics detection. Had an impressive record, over 50 successful busts in 2 years of service. And the handler? Ryan Thompson, 35. Survived, but suffered traumatic brain injury. Been in rehabilitation ever since. Just regained consciousness last month, according to my contact. Bill's eyes narrowed as he continued reading. Says here, the drug bust was targeting a distribution center connected to the East Coast pipeline. Big operation. Sam nodded gravely. Very big. Multi-agency task force. And here's where it gets interesting. He leaned forward. The suspected kingpin of that operation, one Francis Miller. Bill felt the blood drain from his face. Frank? The very same. They couldn't make the charges stick. Key evidence disappeared. Witnesses recanted. Classic signs of tampering or intimidation. The case fell apart. And now he's here, next door to my farm, where my granddaughter is raising what might be the canine officer from that very bust. Sam's expression was grim. If Miller recognized that dog, he'd want to eliminate a potential witness, Bill finished, the implication chilling him to the bone. But why now? Why come to Millbrook? That, Sam said, is what worries me most. Miller's not running. He's expanding. Word is he's setting up distribution channels in rural areas, using properties like the Davis farm as waypoints. Bill closed the folder, his jaw set in a hard line. We need to confirm if Max is really this ranger. And we need to protect Sophie. There's a way to check, Sam replied. Most canines are microchipped these days. Dr. Wright has a scanner. As they prepared to leave, the diner's bell jangled, announcing a new customer. Frank Miller walked in, immaculately dressed in a tailored suit that stood out starkly in the humble establishment. His eyes swept the room, landing on Bill and Sam. A smile that didn't reach his eyes spread across his face as he approached their table. "William Anderson," he said smoothly, "what a pleasure to finally meet you formally. I was just telling your charming granddaughter yesterday what delightful neighbors we're going to be." Bill stood slowly, keeping his expression neutral despite the rage boiling inside him. "Mr. Miller, please call me Frank. And who's your companion?" "Sam Wilson," Sam introduced himself, not offering his hand. "Retired." "Ah, another of Millbrook's distinguished senior citizens." Frank's tone was just shy of condescending. "I must say, it's refreshing to see gentlemen of your generation still getting out and about. So many become shut-ins, lost without purpose after retirement." The barb wasn't subtle. Bill forced a tight smile. "We manage to keep ourselves occupied." "I'm sure you do." Frank's gaze lingered on the folder Sam had hastily closed. "Well, don't let me interrupt your reminiscing. I just stopped in for a quick coffee before heading back to oversee the renovations. Big plans for that old property. Big plans indeed." As Frank moved to the counter, Sam muttered under his breath, "Arrogant son of a bitch." "Always was," Bill replied quietly. "Even when he was just a local troublemaker before he left town, his father was no better." They waited until Frank had received his coffee and exited the diner before continuing their conversation. "He's sending a message," Bill said, "letting us know he's watching. Question is," Sam replied, "how much does he know about Max?" That evening, as Martha prepared dinner, Bill paced the kitchen, recounting his conversation with Sam and the uncomfortable encounter with Frank Miller. "I don't like it, Bill," Martha said, her hands working skillfully to knead dough for biscuits. If this man is as dangerous as you say, we need to be careful, Bill agreed. I'm taking Max to see Dr. Wright tomorrow. If he has a microchip, we can confirm whether he's this missing K9. Martha wiped her hands on her apron. And if he is, what then? Before Bill could answer, the screen door banged open and Sophie burst in, her face flushed with excitement. Grandpa, Max did something amazing. What happened? Bill asked, immediately alert. We were in the back field near the creek and I slipped on some rocks. Before I even hit the ground, Max grabbed my jacket and pulled me back. He saved me from falling in. Martha smiled warmly. Well, isn't that something? Sounds like our Max is a real hero. That's not all, Sophie continued breathlessly. On the way back, he started digging like crazy under that big oak tree. Look what he found! She held out her hand, revealing a tarnished metal object. Bill's heart nearly stopped as he took it from her palm. It was a police badge, caked with dirt but still recognizable, a K9 unit badge from a neighboring county. Where exactly did he find this? Bill asked, his voice carefully controlled. Under the tree where Mom and Dad used to have picnics, Sophie replied, her excitement fading at her grandfather's serious expression. What's wrong? Is it important? Bill exchanged a glance with Martha. It might be, sweetheart. It might help us figure out where Max came from. That night, after Sophie had gone to bed, Bill sat at the kitchen table, turning the badge over in his hands. Martha placed a cup of tea before him and settled into the chair opposite. You think he buried it himself, don't you? She asked quietly. Bill nodded. Police dogs are trained to retrieve and sometimes conceal evidence. If Max, or Ranger, was part of that drug bust, if he somehow escaped with evidence, then Frank Miller has more reason than ever to want him gone, Martha finished. Bill, this is getting dangerous. Maybe we should tell Sophie the truth about your past. About everything. Not yet, Bill replied firmly. Let me confirm whether Max is really this missing K9 first. One step at a time. But as Bill finally climbed into bed that night, he couldn't shake the feeling that time was running out. Frank Miller hadn't returned to Millbrook by coincidence, and his interest in their family wasn't neighborly. Whatever storm was coming, Bill Anderson was determined to protect his family, and the dog that had already become part of it. The following morning, Bill called Dr. Wright and arranged to bring Max in for a microchip scan. He waited until Sophie had left for school, not wanting to raise her hopes or fears until they knew for certain. Come on, boy, he said to Max, who followed him to the truck with military precision. Let's find out who you really are. As they drove into town, Bill noticed Max's posture change, alert, vigilant, his eyes scanning the passing landscape as if expecting danger at every turn. It was the bearing of a working dog, not a pet, and it confirmed what Bill already suspected. Dr. Wright was waiting for them at her small clinic behind the feed store. Her assistant had been sent on errands, ensuring privacy for what might be a sensitive matter. Sam Wilson called me, she said, leading them into an examination room. Filled me in on your suspicions. I appreciate your discretion, Bill replied, guiding Max onto the examination table. We need to know if this dog has a microchip, and if so, what information it contains. Eleanor nodded, retrieving a handheld scanner. Should be straightforward enough. Most service dogs are chipped as standard procedure. She ran the device over Max's shoulders and neck, her expression serious. Let's see what we've got. After several passes, the scanner emitted a soft beep. Eleanor's eyebrows rose as she read the display. Well, he is chipped. Registration number. She paused, frowning. That's odd. The registration information has been partially corrupted or deliberately altered, but there's a service number here, K9372R. Ranger, Bill said quietly. You know this dog? Eleanor asked. Not personally, but I believe he might be a police K-9 reported killed in action last year. His handler was critically injured in the same incident. Eleanor's expression softened as she looked at Max with new understanding. That would explain the healed injuries. Blast trauma, possibly bullet wounds. She gently stroked Max's head. You've been through hell, haven't you, boy? Max leaned slightly into her touch, his amber eyes watchful but trusting. Can you get the full registration information? Bill asked. I can try. I'll need to contact the National Registry. Might take a day or two. She hesitated. Bill, if this dog is who you think he is, there could be legal implications. He technically belongs to the police department that employed him. Bill nodded grimly. I know. But there's more to this story than a missing police dog. Something doesn't add up about how he ended up abandoned and abused on a property neighboring mine, especially now that Frank Miller has moved in next door. Eleanor's eyes widened slightly. Frank Miller? I've heard that name. Didn't he have some trouble with the law years back? More than some, Bill confirmed. And I think he might be involved in whatever happened to this dog. As they prepared to leave, Eleanor placed a hand on Bill's arm. Be careful, Bill. I've seen too many good people get hurt taking on fights bigger than themselves. Some fights choose you, Eleanor, he replied quietly. You don't get to walk away just because the odds are bad. The drive home was silent. Bill lost in thought and Max watching the passing landscape with the focus of a soldier in potentially hostile territory. As they turned onto the long driveway leading to the farm, Bill noticed an unfamiliar black SUV parked near the house. His stomach tightened. Frank Miller. Bill parked behind the SUV and turned to Max. Stay, he commanded firmly, not wanting the dog anywhere near Miller until they understood the full situation. To his surprise, Martha and Frank were sitting on the porch swing, coffee cups in hand. Martha's smile was strained, her eyes communicating silent warning as Bill approached. Well, if it isn't the man of the house, Frank called genially. Your lovely wife has been keeping me entertained while I waited. Hope you don't mind me dropping by unannounced. Neighbor to neighbor. Not at all, Bill replied, keeping his tone neutral as he climbed the porch steps. What brings you by, Mr. Miller? Frank, please. His smile was practiced, predatory. I was hoping to discuss a business proposition. I understand you might be facing some financial challenges with this beautiful old farm. Martha's knuckles whitened around her coffee cup. I never said, no need to be embarrassed, Frank cut in smoothly. It's the story of rural America these days. Family farms struggling to compete with corporate agriculture, property taxes rising, medical bills piling up. It's practically an epidemic. Bill remained standing, deliberately not inviting further familiarity. What's your proposition? Frank set his coffee cup aside and leaned forward, all business now. I'm interested in purchasing a portion of your land, specifically the northwestern section that borders my property. I'm prepared to offer a very generous price, enough to clear your mortgage and then some. The northwestern section, where the oak tree stood, where Max had uncovered the police badge. That land's not for sale, Bill said flatly. Frank's smile dimmed slightly. I understand your attachment to family property, Bill. May I call you Bill? But this is strictly business. The parcel I'm interested in is largely unused from what I can see, primarily woods, that little creek, not agricultural land. It's still not for sale. A flash of irritation crossed Frank's face before his smooth mask returned. Perhaps you should discuss it with your wife before making such a hasty decision. My offer won't be on the table indefinitely. The answer will be the same tomorrow as it is today, Bill replied evenly. Now, if you'll excuse us, we have farm work to attend to. Frank stood, buttoning his expensive jacket. Of course, far be it from me to keep a hard-working man from his labors. He reached into his inner pocket and withdrew a business card, placing it on the small table between the rocking chairs. "When you reconsider, and you will, my number's on the card." As he turned to leave, his gaze swept the farmyard, pausing on Bill's truck where Max was still visible through the window. Something cold and calculating flickered in his eyes. "I heard your granddaughter acquired a dog recently," he remarked casually. "German Shepherd, if I recall. Beautiful animals, very intelligent, very loyal." He emphasized the last word slightly. "I had one myself years ago. Unfortunately, it developed aggressive tendencies. Had to be put down." The threat was thinly veiled. Bill felt his hands curl into fists at his sides. "Our dog is perfectly well behaved," Martha interjected, rising to stand beside her husband. "Sophie's done wonders with him." "I'm sure she has," Frank replied. "Children can be so dedicated to their pets. Heartbreaking when something happens to them." He stepped off the porch. "Well, I won't keep you any longer. Consider my offer, Bill. It really would solve so many problems for your lovely family." They watched in silence as Frank drove away, gravel crunching beneath the expensive tires of his SUV. "He threatened Max," Martha said quietly once he was out of earshot. "And Sophie, by extension." Bill nodded grimly. "He knows. Somehow he knows exactly who Max is." "What did Dr. Wright say?" "The microchip confirms it. Max is almost certainly Ranger, the K-9 officer reported killed during that drug bust last year. His handler was Ryan Thompson." Martha's hand flew to her mouth. "Ryan Thompson? James's friend from college?" Bill nodded. Their late son-in-law had attended police academy with Ryan before choosing a different career path. They had remained casual friends over the years. "Does Sophie know? That connection?" "I don't think so. She was only 8 when Ryan last visited before James and Rebecca's accident. I doubt she'd remember him." Martha sank back onto the porch swing. "This is all too much of a coincidence, Bill. Miller moving in next door. This dog finding his way to Sophie." "I stopped believing in coincidences a long time ago," Bill replied, his expression hardening. "Frank Miller wants that section of land because he thinks there's evidence buried there. Evidence Max might have hidden before he escaped. The badge Sophie found. That could be just the beginning. If Max was trained in evidence retrieval, if he witnessed what happened during that raid." Martha took Bill's hand, her grip strong despite her slender fingers. "What are we going to do?" "First, we need to contact Ryan Thompson. If he's conscious, he might be able to identify Max definitively and tell us what really happened during that raid. And Sophie, she loves that dog, Bill. She'll be devastated if we have to give him back." Bill's eyes softened as he looked toward the truck where Max waited patiently. "One step at a time, Martha. One step at a time." When Sophie returned from school that afternoon, Bill and Martha sat her down at the kitchen table. Max lay at her feet, his eyes alert as always. "Sweetheart," Martha began gently, "we need to talk to you about Max." Sophie's arms immediately wrapped around the dog's neck. "You're not giving him away, are you?" "Please, Grandma. I'll do extra chores. I'll use my allowance for his food." "It's not that," Bill interrupted. "Sophie, we've discovered something important about Max. He isn't just any dog. We believe he's a police dog named Ranger who went missing during a dangerous operation last year." Sophie's eyes widened. "A real police dog? I knew he was special." "Very special," Martha agreed, "and potentially very important. His handler, his police partner, was badly hurt in the same incident where Max disappeared." "Is his partner looking for him?" Sophie asked, her expression conflicted. "Does he miss Max?" Bill chose his words carefully. "His partner's name is Ryan Thompson. He was injured so badly that he's been in the hospital for months. He only recently regained consciousness." "Ryan?" Sophie repeated, her brow furrowing. "Like Daddy's friend Ryan? The one who came to my birthday party once?" Bill and Martha exchanged surprised glances. You remember him? Martha asked. Sophie nodded. He brought me a stuffed police dog, said maybe I'd work with real police dogs someday. Her eyes suddenly filled with understanding. That Ryan is Max's partner? We think so, Bill confirmed. And we need to let him know that Max is alive and safe. Sophie was quiet for a long moment, processing this information. Max leaned against her, seeming to sense her distress. Finally, she looked up, her expression serious beyond her years. If Ryan is Max's partner, they belong together, she said, her voice small but determined. Like you and Grandma belong together. Martha's eyes filled with tears at the child's selfless response. Oh, sweetheart. But, Sophie continued, her chin lifting slightly, until Ryan gets better, Max needs us, and I think we need him too, especially with that mean Mr. Miller next door. Bill raised an eyebrow. What makes you say Mr. Miller is mean? Sophie shrugged. Max doesn't like him, and Max is a police dog, so he knows bad people. Her logic was childishly simple, but not entirely wrong. Plus, I heard Tommy Richards' dad say Mr. Miller is buying up land all over the county for shady business. What shady business, Grandpa? Bill suppressed a smile despite the seriousness of the situation. It means people think Mr. Miller might not be entirely honest in his dealings. Like when he offered to buy our land today? Sophie asked innocently. Bill and Martha stared at her in surprise. How did you know about that? Martha asked. I came home for lunch. I saw his car and heard you talking on the porch. She scratched behind Max's ears. He wants the land where Max found the badge, doesn't he? Because he's hiding something there. Out of the mouths of babes, Bill thought, impressed by his granddaughter's perceptiveness. That's what we think, yes. Then we definitely can't sell it to him, Sophie declared firmly, and we need to help Ryan remember what happened. Because Max remembers, don't you, boy? She looked down at the German shepherd, who gazed back at her with what almost seemed like understanding. That evening, after Sophie had gone to bed, Bill called Sam Wilson again. I need to get in touch with Ryan Thompson, he said without preamble when Sam answered. The K9 handler? Why? Because we've confirmed Max is his dog Ranger, and because my granddaughter remembered that Ryan was a friend of her father's. This whole situation just got a lot more personal, Sam. There was a pause on the line. I'll see what I can do. But Bill, if Miller is involved in this, if he's setting up operations in Millbrook, I know the risks, Bill replied grimly. Better than most. You've been out of the game a long time, old friend. Some things you don't forget, like how to protect your family. After hanging up, Bill checked all the doors and windows, a precaution that had become habit since Frank's visit. He found Martha in Sophie's room watching the child sleep with Max curled protectively at the foot of her bed. We were supposed to give her a normal life, Martha whispered as Bill joined her in the doorway. After James and Rebecca died, we promised we'd keep her safe, give her stability. And we will, Bill assured her, though uncertainty gnawed at his gut. One way or another. As they turned to leave, Max raised his head, his amber eyes meeting Bill's in the dim light. In that moment, an understanding passed between man and dog, a silent recognition of shared purpose. Whatever came next, they would face it together, for the sake of the child they both protected. The next morning, Bill was splitting firewood when a dust cloud on the driveway announced an approaching vehicle. He set down his axe, wiping sweat from his brow, as Sam Wilson's pickup truck came into view. To Bill's surprise, Sam wasn't alone. A younger man sat in the passenger seat, his posture slightly hunched, a cane visible beside him. Ryan Thompson, Bill murmured, recognizing him despite the changes the past year had wrought. The once robust young officer was thinner, paler, with a scar visible along his hairline, but his eyes remained sharp and determined as Sam helped him from the truck. "Bill Anderson," Ryan said, his voice slightly raspy from disuse. "It's been a while." "Too long," Bill agreed, shaking the younger man's hand. "You've had a rough time of it." Ryan's smile was grim. "You could say that. Sam tells me you might have found my partner." Before Bill could answer, a bark rang out from the direction of the barn. They all turned to see Max standing at the entrance, utterly still except for his tail, which moved in a slow, hesitant wag. "Ranger?" Ryan called, his voice breaking slightly. The transformation was instantaneous. Max, Ranger, bounded across the yard with surprising speed given his lingering injuries, skidding to a halt in front of Ryan. He didn't jump up as an ordinary dog might, but sat at perfect attention, trembling with barely contained emotion. Ryan sank to his knees, heedless of the pain it clearly caused him, and wrapped his arms around the dog's neck. "They told me you were dead," he whispered hoarsely. "I looked for you when I woke up. Nobody would tell me what happened to you." The reunion was interrupted by Sophie's voice as she ran from the house. "Max, where did you—" She stopped short at the sight of the stranger embracing her dog. "You're Ryan," she said, her voice small. "Max's partner." Ryan looked up, his face wet with tears. "And you must be Sophie. Sam told me you saved him." "I just gave him food and a place to sleep," Sophie replied, approaching cautiously. "He was really skinny and scared when I found him." Ryan wiped his eyes, keeping one hand buried in Ranger's fur as if afraid the dog might disappear again. "You did more than that, Sophie. You gave him a home when he needed one most." Bill watched the interaction with a mixture of relief and concern. Ranger's identity was confirmed beyond any doubt now, but that only made Frank Miller's interest in their property more sinister. "We should take this inside," he suggested, gesturing toward the house where Martha now stood on the porch. "There's a lot we need to discuss." Once seated around the kitchen table with coffee for the adults and lemonade for Sophie, Ryan explained what had happened the night of the raid. "We had solid intelligence about a major drug shipment coming through an abandoned factory outside of Claiborne. Multiple agencies involved, everything by the book." His hand absently stroked Ranger's head as he spoke. "Or so I thought." "What went wrong?" Bill asked. Ryan's expression darkened. "Everything. The intel was good, but someone had tipped off the dealers. They were waiting for us. The moment we breached the perimeter, explosives detonated." Martha gasped softly. Sophie, who had been allowed to stay for the beginning of the conversation, pressed closer to her grandmother. "I was knocked unconscious immediately," Ryan continued. "Last thing I remember was Ranger dragging me toward the exit. When I woke up in the hospital months later, they told me 3 officers had died and Ranger was presumed killed in a secondary explosion." "But he wasn't," Sophie interjected. "He escaped." Ryan nodded, smiling gently at her. "He sure did, and somehow he found his way to you." "Do you remember anything about who was responsible?" Bill asked. "Any names? Faces?" "That's the frustrating part. My memory of that night is still patchy at best. But I remember Ranger alerting to something unusual just before the explosion. Not drugs, something else. And I remember him grabbing something in his mouth as he pulled me out." "Evidence," Sam suggested. "K-9s are sometimes trained to retrieve and preserve evidence." Bill exchanged a meaningful look with Martha. "Sophie, why don't you show Ryan what Max Ranger found yesterday?" Sophie retrieved the tarnished badge from where Bill had kept it safe in a kitchen drawer. "He dug it up under the big oak tree," she explained, handing it to Ryan. Ryan examined it carefully, his expression grave. "This is Officer Davis's badge. He was one of the officers killed that night." "Why would Ranger bury a fellow officer's badge on our property?" Martha wondered aloud. "Because he was hiding it," Ryan said slowly, understanding dawning. "Ranger was trained in evidence retrieval and concealment. If he thought this badge was important evidence, if he thought it wasn't safe, he would hide it somewhere he considered secure, Bill finished. But why our farm specifically? Ryan looked up, his eyes meeting Bill's. Because of James. He and I were friends. Ranger met your family once, about 2 years ago, when James and Rebecca brought Sophie to visit me at the training center. Animals remember places they felt safe. Sophie's eyes widened. I remember that. The dog that could find hidden toys no matter where I hid them. That was Max? Ryan nodded. That was Ranger. Bill stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the worn linoleum. Sophie, I think it's time for you to go help your grandmother with the garden. Sophie began to protest, but Martha took her hand firmly. Come on, sweetheart. The men need to talk about grown-up things now. Once Sophie and Martha had left, Bill turned to Ryan and Sam. Frank Miller has offered to buy the northwest section of our property, exactly where Ranger buried that badge. He's clearly looking for something, and I'm betting it's not just this badge. Frank Miller. Ryan repeated, his brow furrowing. That name was in the case files. He was a person of interest, but they could never connect him directly to the operation. Because evidence disappeared, Sam added grimly. Including, potentially, whatever else Ranger might have hidden on your property, Bill. Bill crossed to the window, watching Sophie and Martha in the garden, Ranger lying attentively nearby. We need to find whatever else that dog buried before Miller does, and we need to keep my family safe while we do it. Ryan struggled to his feet, leaning on his cane. I want to help. Ranger is my partner. Whatever he was trying to protect, it was important enough for him to risk his life. Bill turned back to face the younger man, seeing in him the same determination he'd once felt as an officer. This could get dangerous, Ryan. You're still recovering. With all due respect, sir, I've been waiting 8 months to find out what happened that night, to get justice for the officers who didn't make it out. I'm not sitting this one out. Bill nodded, a plan already forming in his mind. We'll start searching tomorrow at first light. In the meantime, Sam, can you discreetly find out what Miller's been up to since that raid? Any property purchases, business ventures, unusual activities? Already on it, Sam assured him. I still have friends in the department and enemies of Miller's. As the men continued their discussion, none of them noticed the black SUV that slowly cruised past the farm, or the cold eyes that observed their gathering with calculating interest. Out in the garden, Sophie chatted animatedly to Martha about school and friends, but her gaze kept returning to the house where the men were talking. Despite her young age, she understood more than the adults realized. She knew Max, Ranger, was special. She knew Mr. Miller was dangerous, and she knew her grandfather was worried, even though he tried to hide it. Grandma, she said suddenly, we're not going to let anything bad happen to Max, are we? Martha set down her trowel, wiping soil from her hands. No, sweetheart, we're going to protect him just like he protects us. Sophie nodded solemnly, reaching out to stroke Ranger's head. Good, because I think he still has important work to do. Dawn broke over Millbrook with threads of pink and gold stretching across the horizon, promising another scorching Georgia summer day. Bill Anderson had been awake for hours, sitting at the kitchen table cleaning his old service revolver, a relic from his law enforcement days that he'd kept locked in a safe behind the false panel in his closet. The weight of it felt both familiar and strange in his weathered hands. I haven't seen that in 20 years, Martha said quietly, entering the kitchen in her robe. Not since you hung up your badge. Bill didn't look up, methodically reassembling the weapon. Never thought I'd need it again. Martha placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. Are you sure about this, Bill? Searching for whatever Ranger buried? It could be nothing. Frank Miller doesn't offer premium prices for nothing, Bill replied, sliding the revolver into its holster. And he doesn't threaten people's pets over nothing either. The screen door creaked open as Ryan Thompson stepped onto the porch. Despite doctor's orders to rest, he'd insisted on staying at the Anderson farm overnight, sleeping on their couch with Ranger curled faithfully beside him. "Everyone's on their way," Ryan announced, his voice still carrying the rasp of his injuries. "Sam called. He's bringing metal detectors." Bill nodded, rising stiffly to his feet. "I've got Sophie's school packed. Martha will drop her off early and then head to her sister's in Atlanta. They'll stay there until this is resolved." "I should be here," Martha protested, though they'd been through this argument already. "This is my home, too." "I need to know you're both safe," Bill replied, his voice softening as he took her hands in his. "Please, Martha. It's the only way I can focus on what needs to be done." The resignation in her eyes showed she understood, even if she didn't like it. After 43 years of marriage, she could read the determination in the set of his jaw. "Be careful," she whispered, standing on tiptoe to kiss his cheek. "I've already lost a child. I couldn't bear to lose you, too." An hour later, Sophie stood on the porch with her small suitcase, her face a mask of unhappiness. "Why can't I stay and help look for the evidence? Ranger, is my dog, too." Bill knelt before his granddaughter, wincing slightly as his knees protested. "This isn't about who Ranger belongs to, Sophie. This is about keeping you safe. Your grandmother needs you with her." "Is Mr. Miller really that dangerous?" Sophie asked, her voice small. Bill considered how much truth a 10-year-old could handle. "Some people will do bad things to protect themselves, sweetheart. Mr. Miller might be one of those people. Will you call us? Let us know what you find?" "Every day," Bill promised, pulling her into a tight hug. "Now, give Ranger a proper goodbye." "He's going to be working today." Sophie knelt beside the German shepherd, wrapping her arms around his neck. "You be a good police dog," she whispered into his fur. "Find the bad guy's secrets and take care of Grandpa for me." Ranger licked her cheek once, his intelligent eyes seeming to understand the gravity of the moment. As Martha's station wagon disappeared down the driveway, Bill turned to Ryan and Ranger. "Let's get started." Sam Wilson arrived 30 minutes later, accompanied by a tall, lean man in his 70s whom Bill recognized immediately. "Chief Davis," Bill said, extending his hand to his former commanding officer. "Didn't expect to see you involved in this." Harold Davis's grip was still firm despite his age. His face, deeply lined from decades under the Georgia sun, was set in grim determination. "When Sam told me you'd found Officer Michael Davis's badge buried on your property, I couldn't stay away." Michael was my nephew. The revelation hung heavy in the air. Bill had known Michael Davis had some relation to the former police chief, but hadn't realized how close. "I'm sorry for your loss," Bill said sincerely. "We'll do everything we can to find out what happened." "I know you will," Harold replied, his eyes drifting to Ranger. "Is this the dog? The one who survived the raid?" Ryan stepped forward, one hand resting on Ranger's head. "This is Ranger, my partner. He saved my life that night." Harold nodded slowly. "Good dog," he said simply, though his voice carried the weight of deeper emotion. "Now, let's find what he buried." The men spread out across the northwestern section of the Anderson property, metal detectors in hand. Ranger trotted alongside Ryan, occasionally pausing to sniff the ground with interest. The oak tree where he had unearthed the badge became their central reference point. "Canines are trained to think systematically," Ryan explained as they worked. "If Ranger buried multiple items, he would likely have done so in some sort of pattern, using landmarks he could recognize." "Like what?" Sam asked, sweeping his detector in a careful arc. "Trees, rocks, fence posts, anything distinctive that would remain relatively unchanged." They worked methodically for hours as the summer sun climbed higher, sweat soaking through their shirts. By noon, they had covered nearly half the area without success. "Let's take a break," Bill suggested, noticing Ryan's increasing reliance on his cane. "There's cold tea in the cooler." As they gathered in the shade of the oak tree, a vehicle approaching on the main road caught their attention. The familiar black SUV slowed as it passed the farm entrance, continuing unhurriedly down the road. "Miller," Sam muttered, "keeping an eye on us." "Let him look," Harold said grimly. "Gives me a chance to see the man who might be responsible for my nephew's death." After a brief rest, they resumed their search. And it was Ryan who finally suggested a change in approach. "We're thinking like people, not like Ranger," he said, wiping sweat from his brow. "Let me try something else." He turned to his partner. "Ranger, find." The simple command transformed the dog. Ranger's posture changed, his nose lowered to the ground as he began to quarter the area with practiced efficiency. The men followed at a respectful distance, allowing the dog to work unimpeded. 20 minutes later, Ranger stopped at the edge of the small creek that marked the property boundary. He began to dig purposefully at the base of a distinctive rock formation. "He's got something," Ryan called, hurrying forward as quickly as his injured leg would allow. Bill joined him, kneeling in the damp soil as Ranger continued to excavate. Soon, a muddy plastic bag emerged from the earth. Bill carefully extracted it, conscious of potentially handling evidence. Inside the waterproof bag was a cell phone, battered but intact, sealed away from the elements. "Smart dog," Harold remarked, looking at Ranger with newfound respect. "He knew to keep it dry." "Could be nothing," Sam cautioned. "Could be an old phone someone dropped." Ryan shook his head. "Ranger wouldn't have buried it if it wasn't important." He turned to his partner again. "Find more, boy. Find more." Over the next 3 hours, Ranger led them to 2 more locations. A hollow beneath a lightning-struck pine tree that yielded a small plastic evidence bag containing what appeared to be drug samples, and a spot near an old fence post where they unearthed a USB drive similarly protected in waterproof packaging. "This is it," Ryan said with certainty, holding the items carefully. "This is what got those officers killed. This is what someone tried to eliminate Ranger to hide." "But what exactly is this?" Bill asked, examining the phone. "We need to find out what's on these devices." "I know someone," Sam offered. "Former digital forensics specialist with the GBI, retired now but still has the skills and equipment. Lives about 40 minutes from here." "Can we trust him?" Harold asked. "With my life," Sam assured them. "Already has, more than once." Bill nodded decisively. "Let's go. The sooner we know what we're dealing with, the better." As they prepared to leave, Bill's home phone rang. Few people called the landline anymore, making the sound jarring in the quiet afternoon. "Anderson residence," Bill answered, his voice guarded. "Mr. Anderson." Frank Miller's smooth voice sent a chill down Bill's spine. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything important." "What do you want, Miller?" "Just checking in on your consideration of my offer. I drove by earlier and couldn't help noticing you seem to have quite the gathering at your farm today." "Old friends reuniting, perhaps?" Bill's grip tightened on the receiver. "My business is my own, Miller." Of course. I merely wanted to express my continued interest in your property. In fact, I'm prepared to increase my offer substantially, say, double the original figure." "The land's not for sale, not at any price." There was a pause, and when Miller spoke again, the false pleasantry had vanished from his voice. "I admire your principles, Mr. Anderson, but principles don't pay medical bills. They don't secure your granddaughter's future. And they certainly don't protect aging bodies from unfortunate accidents." The threat hung in the air, unmistakable. "Is that all?" Bill asked, his voice steady despite the anger burning in his chest. "For now. Do give my regards to Officer Thompson and his remarkable dog. Quite the miracle, his recovery, both man and beast." The line went dead. Bill slowly replaced the receiver, turning to face the others who had gathered in the kitchen. "He knows," he said simply. "He knows exactly who's here and what we're doing." "Then we need to move fast," Sam replied, "before he can stop us." They divided into two vehicles, Ryan and Ranger with Bill in his truck, Sam and Harold following in Sam's pickup. As they drove toward Sam's contact, Bill filled Ryan in on Miller's call. "He mentioned you specifically," Bill concluded. "Said to give his regards to you and Ranger. Called your recoveries miraculous." Ryan's expression darkened. "He's been monitoring us all along, probably has been since the raid. But why not just kill Ranger when he had the chance? Why dump him, injured but alive?" "Maybe he thought Ranger was too injured to survive," Ryan suggested, absently scratching his partner's ears. "Or maybe he wanted to use him somehow, follow him to see if he led anyone to the evidence." Bill considered this as they drove, the countryside rolling past in a blur of summer green. "We need to warn Martha and Sophie. If Miller's making threats—" "Already texted Sam's wife to call Martha," Ryan assured him. "They'll stay with her sister until we give the all clear." They arrived at a modest ranch house set back from the road, surrounded by towering pine trees. A security gate with multiple cameras blocked the driveway, opening only after Sam spoke into an intercom. The man who greeted them at the door was younger than Bill had expected, perhaps in his 50s, with prematurely silver hair and alert eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. "Bill, Ryan, Chief Davis, this is Thomas Webb," Sam introduced them. "Former GBI Digital Forensics, now consulting for private security firms." "Tom, these are the friends I called about." Thomas shook their hands firmly, his gaze lingering curiously on Ranger. "Sam mentioned you've got some electronic evidence that needs examining. Bring it inside." The interior of the house was surprisingly modern. One room converted into a high-tech workspace with multiple computer screens and specialized equipment. "Military-grade SCIF," Thomas explained, noting their surprise. "Secure compartmented information facility. No electronic signals in or out unless I allow them." "Sounds like paranoia," Harold remarked. Thomas smiled thinly. "In my line of work, paranoia is just good planning. Now, let's see what you've brought me." They carefully laid out the items Ranger had unearthed: the cell phone, the USB drive, and the evidence bag containing drug samples. "The phone first," Thomas decided, donning latex gloves before picking up the device. "Battery's dead, of course, but that's easily remedied." He connected the phone to a specialized piece of equipment rather than a standard charger. "This will power it without risking data loss. It also creates a complete forensic image before we even try to access the content." The process took nearly an hour, during which the men waited in tense silence. Finally, Thomas gestured them over to his main workstation. "The phone belonged to someone named Carlos Vega," he announced, scrolling through the extracted data. "Last active 8 months ago, which matches your timeline for the raid. There are hundreds of text messages, most in code, but it's pretty clear we're looking at communications about drug shipments." "Vega was one of the suspects we were targeting that night," Ryan confirmed. "Mid-level distributor with connections to larger organizations." Thomas continued scrolling. "There's something else here." A series of messages with a contact listed only as F. Very careful language, but they're clearly discussing protection and payoffs. "F for Frank," Bill suggested. "Miller. Possibly. But the real gold mine is this." Thomas opened a folder of photographs. "These appear to be surveillance photos taken at various locations around Claiborne and surrounding counties. Police stations, officers' homes, vehicles." Ryan leaned forward, his face paling. "Those are officers from the task force. They were monitoring law enforcement." "Not just monitoring," Thomas corrected grimly, opening another file. "Planning This is a detailed schedule of the raid. Time, location, entry points, officer assignments, everything. A heavy silence fell over the room. "Someone leaked the operation details," Harold said finally, his voice tight with anger. "That's why they were waiting with explosives. It wasn't just a tip. They had the entire playbook." "And the USB drive?" Bill asked. Thomas connected it to a separate system, taking similar precautions. When he accessed the contents, his eyebrows rose. Financial records, very detailed ones, payments to someone identified only as Shield, ranging from $10,000 to $50,000, dating back 3 years. "A corrupt cop," Sam muttered. "Has to be. Or someone else with access to police information," Ryan added. "Department staff, dispatcher, consultant." "The last payment," Thomas continued, "was made 2 days after the raid, $100,000, with a note that says final payment as agreed, contract terminated. Payment for the deaths of 3 officers," Harold said, his hands clenching into fists. "For nearly killing Ryan, for trying to eliminate Ranger." "We need to get this to the FBI," Bill decided. "This is bigger than Millbrook, bigger than just Frank Miller." Thomas held up a hand. "And I have contacts who can get this to the right people at the Bureau discreetly." "Do it," Bill agreed. "But we need to move quickly, and we need to get back to the farm before Miller realizes what we've found." As Thomas worked to secure the evidence, Bill stepped outside to call Martha, needing to hear her voice to know she and Sophie were safe. The call went straight to voicemail. "Must be out of range," he muttered, trying to ignore the unease growing in his gut. He tried his sister-in-law's number next with the same result. Sam joined him on the porch, noting his concerned expression. "Everything all right?" "Can't reach Martha or Sophie," Bill replied. "Probably nothing, but your instincts are telling you otherwise," Sam finished. "Mine too. Let's get this evidence secured and head back. I've got a bad feeling about all this." Inside, Thomas was carefully packaging the original evidence items. "I've made 3 encrypted copies," he explained. "One's already been transmitted to my contact at the Bureau. They'll move on this quickly, but given Miller's apparent connections, they'll be discreet." "We need to go," Bill said urgently. "Now." The drive back to the farm seemed interminable, each mile stretching longer than the last. When they finally turned onto the long driveway, Bill's worst fears were confirmed. A black SUV was parked beside the house, its presence ominous in the lengthening shadows of late afternoon. "Miller," Ryan growled, instinctively placing a hand on Ranger's head. "Stay in the truck," Bill ordered, reaching for his service revolver. "Sam, Harold, circle around back. Ryan, keep Ranger here until we know what we're dealing with." "Like hell," Ryan protested. "If he's here, if he's threatening your family." "Then we handle it by the book," Bill cut him off. "We're former law enforcement, not vigilantes. We secure the scene, assess the threat, and act accordingly." As they approached the house cautiously, the front door opened. Frank Miller stepped onto the porch, impeccably dressed as always, a glass of what appeared to be Martha's homemade lemonade in his hand. "Ah, the search party returns," he called, his tone conversational. "I was beginning to worry. Martha kindly offered refreshments while I waited." Bill's blood ran cold at the mention of his wife's name. "Where is she?" "Inside, of course, making more of this excellent lemonade. Won't you join us? We have much to discuss." Every instinct in Bill's body screamed danger, but he kept his expression neutral as he mounted the porch steps. "I thought Martha was visiting her sister in Atlanta." "Change of plans, apparently," Miller replied smoothly. "She said something about car trouble. Fortunately, I was driving by when she called the house." "Neighborly of me to offer assistance, don't you think?" Bill stepped past Miller into the house, his hand never straying far from his concealed weapon. In the kitchen, Martha stood at the counter, her back unnaturally stiff, her movements mechanical as she prepared a pitcher of lemonade. "Martha?" Bill called softly. She turned, and the fear in her eyes told him everything he needed to know. "Bill," she whispered, "I'm sorry. He said he knew where Sophie was. Said he'd hurt her if I didn't—" "Where is Sophie?" Bill demanded, whirling to face Miller, who had followed him inside. "Safe," Miller replied, his pleasant facade dropping away. "For now, her continued well-being depends entirely on you, Mr. Anderson, on what you found today, and what you intend to do with it. If you've harmed one hair on her head—" Bill's voice came out as a dangerous growl, his hand moving instinctively toward his concealed weapon. "Please." Miller held up his hands in a placating gesture, though his eyes remained cold and calculating. "I'm a businessman, not a monster. The child is unharmed. My associate simply intercepted her and your wife before they reached Atlanta. Sophie is being entertained with cartoons and ice cream as we speak." Martha moved to Bill's side, her hand gripping his arm, both seeking reassurance and restraining him. "He showed me a live video call of Sophie. She's scared but seems physically fine." "What do you want, Miller?" Bill demanded, forcing himself to think past the rage and fear clouding his judgment. Miller's smile was thin and predatory. "What I've always wanted. The evidence your remarkable canine friend buried on your property. All of it." Through the window, Bill could see Sam and Harold taking positions outside, keeping out of Miller's line of sight. Ryan remained in the truck with Ranger, though Bill could tell by his posture that he was poised to move at the first sign of trouble. "We don't know what you're talking about," Bill replied, playing for time. "The dog dug up an old badge, nothing more." Miller sighed, setting his lemonade glass down carefully on a coaster, the casual politeness of the gesture somehow more menacing than any overt threat. "Mr. Anderson, Bill, let's not insult each other's intelligence. I've been watching your property for months, ever since my sources informed me that a certain missing police dog might have survived the Claiborne incident." He straightened his already immaculate tie. "I had nearly given up hope until your granddaughter purchased that dog for $5. Imagine my surprise when I realized it was the very same animal I thought had been eliminated." "You tried to have him killed," Martha said, her voice trembling with anger despite her fear. "An innocent animal." "Collateral damage," Miller dismissed with a wave of his hand. "The dog was a liability, as were the officers who didn't survive that night." His cold eyes fixed on Bill. "Now I'll ask one more time. Where is the evidence Ranger recovered?" "Safe," Bill answered truthfully. "Beyond your reach." Something dangerous flashed in Miller's eyes. "I was afraid you might say that." He withdrew his phone and dialed a number. "Show Mr. Anderson what's at stake," he instructed the person on the other end. He turned the phone to face them. On the screen was Sophie, sitting in what appeared to be a motel room. She looked frightened, but unharmed, a large man visible in the background. "Grandpa?" Sophie's voice was small through the phone's speaker. "I want to come home." Bill felt as though he'd been punched in the gut. "It's okay, sweetheart," he managed, fighting to keep his voice steady. "Everything's going to be fine. Just do what they say for now. We're coming to get you." Miller ended the call abruptly. "Touching. Now here's what's going to happen. You're going to tell me exactly what you found and where you've taken it. Then you're going to contact whoever has it and arrange for its return. Once I have everything, your granddaughter comes home." "And then what?" Bill asked. "You'll just let us go on with our lives. After we've seen your face, know your name, can connect you to the deaths of 3 police officers?" Miller's expression hardened. "One problem at a time, Mr. Anderson." The tension in the room was palpable, a live wire ready to spark. Outside, the sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the farmyard. Bill needed to stall, needed time for Sam and Harold to get into position, needed an opportunity to communicate with Ryan. "I need to make a call," Bill said finally. "The evidence isn't here. We left it with someone for safekeeping." "Slowly," Miller instructed, producing a handgun from inside his jacket. "And on speaker." As Bill reached for the kitchen phone, a sudden commotion erupted outside. Barking, shouting, the sound of breaking glass. Miller's head whipped toward the window, his concentration broken for a crucial moment. Bill seized the opportunity, lunging forward to tackle Miller to the ground. The gun discharged with a deafening crack, the bullet splintering wood in the ceiling. Martha screamed, ducking behind the counter as the two men grappled on the floor. Despite his age, Bill fought with the desperation of a man defending his family. But Miller was younger, stronger, and fueled by the cold calculation of self-preservation. He managed to slam the butt of his gun against Bill's temple, sending an explosion of pain through his head. Stars danced in Bill's vision as Miller shoved him aside and staggered to his feet. Before he could regain his aim, the kitchen door burst open. Ranger charged in, a blur of fur and focused aggression. Ryan just steps behind him. "Ranger, packin'!" Ryan commanded. The German shepherd launched himself at Miller with precision and power, clamping his jaws around the wrist of Miller's gun hand. Miller howled in pain, the weapon clattering to the floor as Ranger forced him down. Ryan was on him in an instant, his own service weapon trained steadily on Miller's head. "Don't move," he ordered, his voice deadly calm. "Not 1 inch." Sam and Harold rushed in seconds later, quickly securing Miller with handcuffs as Ranger maintained his hold, growling low in his throat. "Martha, are you hurt?" Bill asked, struggling to his feet, his head still spinning from the blow. "I'm fine," she assured him, though her hands shook as she pressed a kitchen towel to a small cut on his forehead. "But Sophie—" "Where is she?" Ryan demanded, pressing his gun against Miller's temple. "Where's the girl?" Miller's composure had finally cracked, pain and fear replacing his smug confidence. "Mountain View Motel, room 112, he gasped. "Just outside town. My man won't hurt her, he's just there to watch her." "Call him," Sam ordered, retrieving Miller's phone from the floor. "Tell him to let her go. Now." "He won't," Miller protested. "Not without hearing from me in person. He has strict instructions." "Then I guess we're taking a little drive," Harold interrupted grimly. "All of us." As Sam and Harold secured Miller in the back of Sam's pickup truck, Bill pulled Ryan aside. "The evidence?" he asked quietly. "Safe with Thomas," Ryan assured him. "He called his FBI contact while we were driving back. They're mobilizing as we speak." "We need to get to Sophie before they do," Bill insisted. "If there's a gunfight, if she's caught in the crossfire—" Ryan nodded in understanding. "We go in first, get Sophie out, then let the professionals handle the rest." The drive to the Mountain View Motel was the longest 15 minutes of Bill's life. Every second that passed was another second his granddaughter remained in danger. Martha sat beside him in the truck, her hand clutching his so tightly her knuckles were white. Ranger rode in the back seat, alert and ready, sensing the tension. The motel was a run-down establishment on the outskirts of Millbrook, the kind of place that rented rooms by the week and didn't ask questions. Sam's truck followed close behind, Harold keeping a watchful eye on their prisoner. "Room 112, Bill murmured as they pulled into the nearly empty parking lot. "There." The room was at the far end of the single-story building, partially obscured by an ice machine and vending area. A black sedan was parked directly in front of it, undoubtedly belonging to Miller's associate. "I'll go first," Ryan said, checking his weapon. "Ranger can detect if there's more than one person inside and if they're armed." "It's my granddaughter," Bill protested, "and my partner is the one with the training for this exact scenario," Ryan countered gently. "Let us do our job, Bill." After a moment, Bill nodded reluctantly. "Be careful, both of you." Ryan and Ranger approached the room cautiously, using the ice machine as cover. When they were within range, Ryan gave a hand signal. Ranger moved forward silently, circling the perimeter of the room, sniffing carefully at the door and window edges. After a moment, the German Shepherd returned to Ryan's side, giving a soft whine and specific head movements, a communication system Bill recognized from his own days working with canine units. Ryan made his way back to the trucks. 2 people inside, 1 adult male, likely armed. Ranger confirmed Sophie's scent. The man is near the door, Sophie further back in the room. "What's the play?" Sam asked, joining them from his truck, where Harold remained guarding Miller. "Direct approach," Ryan decided. "He's expecting to hear from Miller. We give him what he expects, just not how he expects it." Using Miller's phone, they called the man inside. Ryan did the talking, keeping Miller where the kidnapper could see him on video but with a gun pressed against his ribs, out of the camera's view. "Change of plans, Decker," Miller said stiffly, following Ryan's whispered instructions. "Bring the girl outside. Now." The man, Decker, looked suspicious. "That wasn't the arrangement, boss." "You said plans change," Miller snapped, a bead of sweat rolling down his temple. "Do it now." After a tense moment, Decker nodded. 5 minutes. The moment the call ended, they positioned themselves strategically around the room. Bill and Martha stayed in their truck, which had been moved to block any potential escape route. Sam took position behind the ice machine, while Ryan and Ranger waited on the blind side of the building, ready to circle around if Decker attempted to flee. 3 minutes later, the motel room door opened cautiously. Decker emerged first, one hand firmly gripping Sophie's shoulder, the other hovering near his waistband where a weapon was undoubtedly concealed. "I don't see you, boss," he called out, scanning the parking lot suspiciously. "Let the girl go, Decker." Ryan's voice rang out clearly from his concealed position. "You're surrounded by law enforcement." Decker's reaction was instantaneous and terrifying. He yanked Sophie against him, pulling his gun and pressing it against her temple. "Come out where I can see you, or the kid gets it." Sophie's face was pale with fear, her eyes wide and searching desperately for her grandparents. "Grandpa?" she called, her voice breaking. "I'm here, sweetheart," Bill responded, fighting every instinct that screamed at him to rush forward. "Stay calm. Everything's going to be okay." "You've got 3 seconds," Decker shouted, his voice edged with panic. 1, 2. Before he could reach 3, a tan blur launched from the side of the building. Ranger hit Decker with precision, targeting his gun arm with powerful jaws. The man screamed in pain and surprise, his grip on Sophie broken by the impact. "Run, Sophie!" Bill shouted, emerging from behind the truck. Sophie sprinted toward her grandparents as Ryan and Sam converged on Decker, who was now on the ground with Ranger pinning him down, the gun kicked safely away. Martha enveloped Sophie in her arms, both of them shaking with relief and residual fear. Bill wrapped his arms around them both, his heart pounding so hard he thought it might burst from his chest. "Are you hurt?" he asked Sophie, kneeling to examine her closely. She shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "I was so scared, Grandpa. They said they would hurt you and Grandma if I made any noise." "You're safe now," Bill assured her, his own eyes damp. "No one's going to hurt any of us anymore." As Ryan and Sam secured Decker, Ranger trotted over to Sophie, nudging her hand gently with his nose. She dropped to her knees and threw her arms around the dog's neck, burying her face in his fur. "You saved me," she whispered. "Again." The sound of approaching sirens cut through the evening air. Harold had called the local police from Sam's truck, where Miller remained securely handcuffed and now ashen-faced at the failure of his plan. "We need to get Sophie away from here," Bill said to Martha. "She doesn't need to see any more of this." As they guided Sophie to their truck, a fleet of unmarked vehicles converged on the motel parking lot. Men and women and FBI windbreakers poured out, quickly taking control of the scene. A tall, stern-faced woman approached Bill directly. "Special Agent Caroline Weber." She introduced herself, showing her credentials. We received information about a kidnapping and connection to the Claiborne incident. Thomas Webb works fast, Bill remarked. Agent Weber's expression remained professional, but a hint of satisfaction showed in her eyes. We've been building a case against Frank Miller for months. The evidence your dog recovered was the missing piece we needed. Will you need us to stay? Bill asked, glancing at Sophie, who was exhausted and traumatized. We have your contact information, Weber assured him. Take your family home. We'll be in touch tomorrow for formal statements. As they prepared to leave, Ryan approached with Ranger at his side. They're taking Miller and Decker into federal custody, he reported. Multiple charges: kidnapping, attempted murder, conspiracy, corruption. They won't see daylight for decades. Good, Bill said simply, too emotionally drained for more elaborate commentary. Ryan hesitated, then extended his hand. I can never thank you enough. All of you. Without your family. Without Sophie. He looked down at Ranger, who stood tall and proud beside him. I would have lost him forever. The unspoken question hung in the air. What would happen to Ranger now? Sophie sensed it too, her arms tightening around the dog as she stood beside the truck. He has to go with Ryan, doesn't he? She asked, her voice small but resigned. He's a police dog. He has a job. Bill looked at his granddaughter, marveling at her maturity and compassion even in this moment. Yes, sweetheart. Ranger is a working dog. He and Ryan are partners. Sophie nodded solemnly, kneeling once more to face the German shepherd. Thank you for protecting us, she whispered, pressing her forehead against his. I'll miss you, but you need to go catch more bad guys. Ryan watched the exchange with glistening eyes. You know, he said carefully, Ranger's injuries mean he can't return to active duty. He'll need to retire. He glanced at Bill and Martha. Police dogs usually live with their handlers after retirement, but my apartment doesn't allow pets, and my physical therapy will take months. Hope bloomed on Sophie's face. He could stay with us? Until you're better? If your grandparents agree, Ryan replied, looking to Bill and Martha. It would be a tremendous help to me knowing he's with people who love him. Martha smiled through her exhaustion. That dog saved our family. He'll always have a home with us, temporary or permanent. The relief and joy on Sophie's face was like sunshine breaking through storm clouds. For the first time since the nightmare began, Bill felt the tight knot of tension in his chest begin to loosen. As they drove home in the gathering darkness, Sophie fell asleep in the back seat, her head resting against Ranger's side. The German shepherd maintained his protective vigilance, his intelligent eyes meeting Bill's in the rearview mirror. Thank you, Bill whispered to the dog, knowing somehow that Ranger understood. For everything. Martha reached across the seat to take Bill's hand, her touch grounding him as it had for over 40 years. What happens now? She asked quietly. Bill glanced at their sleeping granddaughter and the faithful dog watching over her. Now, he said, we heal. Together. But as they turned onto the long driveway leading to the farmhouse, Bill couldn't shake the feeling that their ordeal wasn't quite over. Frank Miller might be in custody, but men like him rarely operated alone. The evidence Ranger had preserved would implicate others, possibly people in positions of power who had much to lose. The farm that had been his sanctuary for 20 years now felt exposed, vulnerable. He would need to remain vigilant, to protect what mattered most. As if sensing his thoughts, Ranger sat up straighter in the back seat, his ears alert, his posture communicating a clear message. I'm still on duty. I'm still watching. In that moment, Bill felt a profound connection with the dog. Two protectors, two guardians with the same mission. Whatever came next, they would face it together for the sake of the family they both loved. The next morning dawned with a stillness that felt almost surreal after the previous day's chaos. Bill woke early, his body aching from the confrontation with Miller, the cut on his temple now a dull throb beneath the bandage Martha had carefully applied. He found himself automatically reaching for his service revolver on the nightstand, a habit from decades past that had resurfaced with alarming ease. Downstairs, he found Sophie already awake, sitting cross-legged on the living room floor beside Ranger. The German shepherd lay with his head on his paws, watchful eyes tracking Bill's movement but otherwise perfectly still as Sophie read aloud from Old Yeller. "Morning, Grandpa," she greeted, looking up from her book. "Ranger and I are having quiet time. Dr. Wright called and said it's good for him to rest today." Bill smiled, marveling at his granddaughter's resilience. Children, he thought, could sometimes bounce back from trauma with a flexibility adults had long since lost. Still, he noticed the shadows beneath her eyes, the slight tension in her shoulders. The ordeal had left its mark. "That's good advice," he agreed, moving carefully to his armchair, his knees protesting. "How did you sleep?" Sophie shrugged. "I had a bad dream, but then I remembered Ranger was here, and I felt better." She leaned over to whisper something in the dog's ear, and his tail thumped once against the floor in response. The kitchen door swung open as Martha emerged with a tray of breakfast, toast, eggs, orange juice, and coffee for Bill. "I thought we'd eat in here today," she announced, setting the tray on the coffee table. "Make it special." Bill recognized his wife's gesture for what it was, an attempt to reclaim normalcy, to transform their living room from a place of fear back into a sanctuary. 43 years of marriage had taught him to read the determined set of her jaw, the deliberate brightness in her voice. "Sounds perfect," he agreed, accepting the mug of coffee she handed him. "Any word from the authorities this morning?" Martha nodded. "Agent Weber called while you were still asleep. They want us to come in at 11 to give formal statements. Ryan's already at the station with Sam and Harold." A knock at the front door sent Ranger immediately to his feet, positioning himself between the entrance and Sophie, a low growl rumbling in his chest. "Easy, boy," Bill soothed, though he found himself reaching again for the weapon that wasn't there. "Martha, take Sophie to the kitchen. Ranger, with me." Bill approached the door cautiously, Ranger at his side. Through the window, he recognized Dr. Eleanor Wright's weathered pickup in the driveway, and his tension eased marginally. "Good morning, Bill," Eleanor greeted when he opened the door. She carried her black medical bag and wore an expression of professional concern. "Sam called and asked me to check on you folks, and especially on our four-legged hero." Bill welcomed her inside, calling for Martha and Sophie to return. "We're all a bit banged up, but nothing serious. Ranger took a hit to his previously injured leg during the scuffle, though." Eleanor knelt beside the German shepherd, who submitted to her examination with military stoicism. "He's aggravated the old injury," she confirmed after a thorough check. "Nothing's broken again, but he needs rest and anti-inflammatories." She glanced up at Sophie, who hovered anxiously nearby. "No running or jumping for at least a week. Just gentle walks and lots of quiet time." "We can do that," Sophie promised solemnly. "I'll take the best care of him ever." Eleanor smiled, rising to her feet with a slight wince, evidence of her own advancing years. "I know you will." She turned to Bill and Martha, her expression becoming more serious. "The whole town's talking about what happened. Frank Miller's arrest, the FBI presence. People are saying he was involved in drug trafficking, that he tried to kidnap Sophie." "People talk," Bill said neutrally. "Some of it's true, some isn't." Eleanor nodded in understanding. "Well, whatever the full story is, folks around here are rallying behind you. Pastor Davis called a special prayer meeting last night. Harold Jenkins, you know, from the feed store, who's never given credit to anyone in 30 years, told me to let you know your account there is covered through the end of the year." Martha's eyes widened. But that's community, Eleanor finished for her. That's what it is. Millbrook takes care of its own. After Eleanor left, the family prepared to head into town for their interviews with the FBI. Sophie insisted on bringing Ranger, unwilling to leave him alone at the farm despite assurances that Miller and his associate were securely in custody. "He makes me feel safe," she said simply, and neither Bill nor Martha had the heart to deny her. The Millbrook County Sheriff's Department had been transformed by the federal presence. FBI agents moved purposefully through the normally quiet building, and an area had been cordoned off for interviews. Ryan was just exiting one of the rooms as they arrived, his face drawn with exhaustion, but his eyes clear with purpose. "They've been at it all morning," he told Bill quietly as Sophie and Martha settled in the waiting area with Ranger. "Miller's not talking, but his associate Decker is singing like a canary to save his own skin. And they found another cache of evidence at Miller's new property. Financial records, communications, everything." "Good," Bill replied grimly. "Any word on the Shield? The corrupt cop or insider mentioned in those files?" Ryan's expression darkened. "Not yet, but they're close. They've narrowed it down to someone high-ranking, someone with access to sensitive operation details." Agent Weber approached, clipboard in hand. "Mr. and Mrs. Anderson, we're ready for you now. We'll need to speak with Sophie separately, but we have a child psychologist present, and she can keep Ranger with her if that helps." The interviews were thorough but conducted with surprising sensitivity. Weber and her colleagues asked detailed questions about Sophie's rescue, about Ranger finding the evidence, about Bill's confrontation with Miller. They seemed particularly interested in Bill's law enforcement background, which had come as a surprise to Sophie. "You were a police officer, Grandpa?" she asked during a break between interviews, her eyes wide. "Like Ryan?" Bill nodded, somewhat sheepishly. "For 25 years before I took over the farm from your great-grandfather. K-9 unit commander, just like Ryan is now. Why didn't you ever tell me?" Bill exchanged a glance with Martha. "I wanted to leave that life behind when I retired. Wanted to be just Grandpa to you, not ex-officer Anderson." Sophie considered this, her young mind processing the revelation. "Is that why Ranger, trusted you right away? Because he could tell you were a police officer too?" "Maybe," Bill acknowledged, touched by her perception. "Dogs are good judges of character." Their conversation was interrupted by a commotion near the front of the building. Raised voices echoed down the hallway, followed by the unmistakable sound of someone being physically restrained. Ryan appeared in the doorway, his expression grim but satisfied. "They just arrested Sheriff Dawson," he announced quietly. "He was Shield, the insider who sold out the task force to Miller. They found offshore accounts matching the payment records from the USB drive." Bill felt a cold shock run through him. Robert Dawson had been a rookie officer when Bill was commander, had risen through the ranks after Bill's retirement. They'd never been close, but Bill had considered him a dedicated lawman, if somewhat overly ambitious. "Dawson," he repeated, struggling to reconcile the man he thought he knew with the betrayal that had cost 3 officers their lives. "I recommended him for promotion when I retired." Ryan's expression softened with understanding. "You couldn't have known, Bill. Men like that, they're good at hiding who they really are." Agent Weber joined them, her typically stern expression showing a hint of satisfaction. "Dawson's arrest completes the picture. With his testimony and the evidence Ranger recovered, we can connect Miller to the drug operation, the corruption, and the deaths of those officers. It's over." But even as Weber spoke, Bill couldn't shake the feeling that nothing was truly over. Not for the families of the officers who had died, not for Ryan, who still bore the physical and emotional scars of that night, not for Sophie, who had experienced trauma no child should face. "What happens now?" Martha asked, giving voice to Bill's thoughts. "Now we build the case," Weber replied. "There will be trials, testimonies. We'll need you all to be witnesses, including Ranger. His recovery of the evidence is crucial to the timeline we're establishing." As if hearing his name, Ranger padded over from where he'd been resting beside Sophie, nudging Bill's hand with his nose. Bill found himself automatically scratching behind the dog's ears, a gesture that seemed to comfort them both. "And after the trials?" Bill pressed. "What about Sophie's safety? Miller has connections, friends in high places." Weber's expression remained professional, but her eyes softened slightly. "Miller's network is being dismantled as we speak. Multiple arrests across 3 states, asset seizures, plea deals in exchange for information. By the time this is over, he won't have the resources or connections to threaten anyone." Bill wanted to believe her, but decades in law enforcement had taught him that no criminal enterprise was ever completely eradicated. There were always loose ends, always someone seeking revenge or trying to rebuild. Ryan seemed to sense his concern. "I'll be staying in Millbrook for my recovery," he said. "Renting the Johnson place just down the road from you. Close enough to keep an eye on things, to be there if you need me." The revelation surprised Bill. "I thought you were based in Claiborne." Ryan shrugged, a faint smile crossing his face. "Was. But my physical therapist recommended country living for my recovery. Fresh air, peaceful surroundings. And," he added, glancing at Ranger, "it means I can visit my partner regularly while he enjoys his temporary retirement on your farm." Relief washed over Sophie's face at this confirmation that Ranger would indeed be staying with them. She had been unusually quiet during the discussions, absorbing the adult conversations with the solemn focus of a child who had been forced to grow up too quickly. "Can we go home now?" she asked finally, fatigue evident in her voice. Agent Weber nodded. "We have everything we need for today. We'll be in touch if we have additional questions." She hesitated, then added with unexpected warmth, "You have a remarkable family, Mr. Anderson, and an extraordinary dog." The drive home was quiet, each of them lost in their own thoughts. The farmhouse came into view as they crested the final hill, bathed in the golden light of late afternoon. Bill felt a surge of gratitude so powerful it nearly overwhelmed him, gratitude that they were all together, all safe, all home. As they pulled into the driveway, an unfamiliar car was parked near the barn, a sleek sedan with rental plates. A middle-aged woman with auburn hair stood beside it, shielding her eyes against the sun as she watched their approach. "Who's that?" Martha wondered, tension creeping back into her voice. Bill slowed the truck, instinctively positioning it between the stranger and his family. Ranger raised his head in the back seat, alert but not alarmed. The woman stepped forward as they parked, her expression a mixture of hesitation and determination. "Mr. Anderson?" she called. "Mrs. Anderson. I'm Patricia Thompson, Ryan's sister. I hope it's okay that I came by. I wanted to thank you personally for what you did for my brother and for Ranger." The tension drained from Bill's shoulders. He'd heard Ryan mention his sister, a corporate attorney from Atlanta who had been handling his affairs during his hospitalization. "Of course," Martha replied warmly, exiting the truck. "Please, come inside. We were just about to have some lemonade on the porch." As they settled into the porch chairs, Patricia explained her visit. "When Ryan told me what happened, how your family saved Ranger and helped expose what really happened during that raid, I had to come see you myself." Her eyes grew damp. "For 8 months, I watched my brother slip away. Even after he regained consciousness, it was like part of him was still missing. But when he called me last night, I heard something in his voice I haven't heard since before the accident. Purpose. Hope. He's a good man," Bill said simply. "And Ranger is an extraordinary dog. Which is why I wanted to discuss something with you," Patricia continued, her manner becoming more businesslike. "Ryan's medical expenses are considerable, and while his insurance covers much of it, the specialized physical therapy he needs isn't fully covered. I've been working with the department and the Officers Benevolent Association to arrange funding, and they've suggested a charity event." "What kind of event?" Martha asked. "A community fundraiser centered around Ranger's story, the $5 hero, they're calling it. The department wants to honor both Ryan and Ranger and use the opportunity to raise awareness about K-9 officers and the dangers they face." She looked to Sophie, who had been listening intently. "Your part in this story, how you saved Ranger when no one else would, is incredibly powerful." Sophie's eyes widened. "People want to hear about Max, Ranger, and me?" Patricia nodded, smiling. "Very much so. In fact, the event organizers were hoping you might say a few words, tell how you found him and why you decided to help him." Sophie looked to her grandparents, uncertainty written across her face. "Would I have to talk in front of a lot of people?" "Only if you want to, sweetheart," Bill assured her. "No one will make you do anything that makes you uncomfortable." "The thing is," Patricia added gently, "stories like Ranger's and yours help people understand why K-9 officers are so important, why they deserve proper care after their service. It could help other retired police dogs find good homes." Something resolved in Sophie's expression. "Then I'll do it. For Max. Ranger. And for all the other police dogs." As Patricia outlined the plans for the event, scheduled for the following month, Bill found himself watching Ranger. The German Shepherd had positioned himself at Sophie's feet, his vigilant eyes scanning the farmyard periodically before returning to rest on the gathering, always on duty, always protecting, even in his retirement. In that moment, Bill recognized a profound truth. Ranger had saved them all, in different ways. He had saved Ryan's life during the raid. He had preserved evidence that would bring justice to fallen officers. He had protected Sophie from Miller's associate. And perhaps most miraculously, he had brought healing to a little girl who had lost too much, too young. $5. The thought almost made Bill laugh. The most valuable $5 ever spent. Later that evening, after Patricia had departed with promises to stay in touch about the fundraiser plans, the family gathered for dinner. For the first time in days, the mood was lighter, the conversation flowing more naturally. Sophie regaled them with ideas for her speech at the fundraiser, her enthusiasm growing with each passing minute. "And I'm going to tell everyone that you shouldn't judge something by how broken it looks," she declared, "because sometimes the most broken things are the most valuable." Martha reached across the table to squeeze her granddaughter's hand, unable to speak through the emotion closing her throat. Bill felt his own eyes growing damp. As they cleared the dishes, a vehicle pulled into the driveway, Ryan's truck. He had mentioned he might stop by to check on Ranger before heading to his newly rented house. Bill met him on the porch, offering a cold drink, which Ryan gratefully accepted. They sat in companionable silence for a moment, watching the sun begin its descent toward the horizon. "Patricia told us about the fundraiser idea," Bill said finally. "Sophie's quite excited about it." Ryan smiled. "She's an amazing kid. After everything she's been through, to still have that kind of heart?" He shook his head in wonder. "She reminds me why I became an officer in the first place." "She has that effect on people," Bill agreed, pride evident in his voice. Ryan's expression grew more serious. "There's something else I wanted to discuss with you, Bill. Something about Ranger's future." Bill felt a pang of apprehension. "What about it?" "I've been talking with the department brass. Given his injuries and age, Ranger is officially being retired from service." Ryan paused, choosing his words carefully. "Normally, retired canines live with their handlers. But my apartment in the city isn't suitable, and my recovery will take at least a year, possibly longer." "He's welcome here for as long as you need," Bill assured him. "You know that." "That's just it," Ryan continued. "I've been watching him with Sophie. with your family. He's different here, more at peace. The trauma behaviors he was exhibiting after the raid, the hypervigilance, the nightmares, they're less severe. It's like being here is healing him. Bill understood immediately where Ryan was heading. You're considering making the arrangement permanent. Ryan nodded, a complex mixture of emotions crossing his face. It would be the best thing for Ranger. And I think for Sophie, too. But I wanted to be sure you and Martha are truly on board with having a retired police dog as a permanent addition to your household. He's still young, could live another 8 to 10 years. He saved our granddaughter's life, Bill said simply. He helped bring justice for your fallen comrades. He exposed corruption that might never have come to light otherwise. He looked Ryan directly in the eye. Ranger will always have a home with us, for as long as he lives. Relief washed over Ryan's face. I was hoping you'd say that. There's paperwork, of course. The department needs to officially transfer his ownership, and I'd want to be part of his life, visit regularly, help with any special needs he might have as he ages. Of course, Bill agreed readily. He's your partner. That bond doesn't disappear with retirement papers. As if sensing he was being discussed, Ranger appeared in the doorway, Sophie close behind him. The German shepherd padded over to Ryan, resting his head on the officer's knee in a gesture of affection and loyalty. Were you talking about Ranger staying with us forever? Sophie asked, her perception once again surprising the adults. Ryan smiled gently. We were. How would you feel about that, Sophie? Her face lit up with joy, but there was wisdom in her eyes beyond her years. I'd love it, but only if it's what Ranger wants too. He might miss being a police dog. Ryan reached down to stroke Ranger's head. He'll always be a police dog at heart, Sophie. But even police dogs need a loving home and a family to protect. I think he's found both here with you. As Sophie knelt to embrace Ranger, whispering promises of walks and treats and bedtime stories into his fur, Bill felt the last of his anxiety about the future begin to dissolve. There would be challenges ahead, the trials, the fundraiser, the continued healing from trauma for all of them. But they would face those challenges together, strengthened by the bonds that had been forged through their ordeal. In saving Ranger for $5, Sophie had ultimately saved them all. She had reminded them of the power of compassion, the importance of seeing value where others saw only damage. And in her innocent determination to help a wounded animal, she had set in motion events that would bring justice to the fallen and healing to the living. As darkness settled over the farm, stars beginning to pepper the vast Georgia sky, Bill Anderson looked at his family. Martha knitting on the porch swing, Sophie and Ranger playing a gentle game of fetch in the yard, Ryan watching with the contented expression of a man who had found his way home after a long journey. $5 for a broken dog that nobody wanted. Bill shook his head in wonder. Some things in life, he reflected, truly were priceless. 1 month later, the Millbrook Community Center bustled with activity. Red, white, and blue bunting decorated the walls, and a large banner proclaimed the $5 Hero, a canine benefit. Folding chairs had been arranged in neat rows, already filling with townspeople and visitors from neighboring communities. A small stage held a podium and several chairs, one of which had been modified with a special cushion for a four-legged guest of honor. In a small side room, Sophie Peterson adjusted her new dress, a simple blue sundress Martha had sewn especially for the occasion, while Bill attempted to affix a small corsage to her collar. "Hold still, sweetheart," he murmured, his large fingers struggling with the delicate pin. "There, perfect." Sophie fidgeted nervously, peering through the doorway at the growing crowd. "What if I forget what to say, Grandpa? What if I mess up?" Bill knelt before his granddaughter, wincing slightly as his knees protested. At 67, such movements were no longer as fluid as they once had been, but he ignored the discomfort. "You won't forget," he assured her. "But even if you did, it wouldn't matter. Just speak from your heart about Ranger, about what he means to you. That's all anyone wants to hear." "There are so many people," she whispered, wide-eyed. "I didn't think this many would come." "Ranger's story touched a lot of hearts," Martha said, entering the room with a glass of water for Sophie. "And so did yours, my brave girl." The door opened again, and Ryan Thompson entered with Ranger at his side. The German shepherd looked almost regal in his formal K9 vest, which had been brought out of retirement for the occasion. His coat gleamed from the special bath Sophie had given him that morning, and though his right hind leg still bore the slight stiffness of his old injury, he carried himself with dignity. "There's the man of the hour," Bill greeted, reaching down to pat Ranger's head. Ryan smiled, though his face showed the strain of the past weeks. The trials were proceeding, with both Frank Miller and Sheriff Dawson firmly in custody awaiting their day in court. Ryan had been called to testify multiple times, reliving the trauma of the raid and its aftermath, but today the focus was on celebration, not prosecution. "The press is here," Ryan reported. "Local stations, some from Atlanta too, and there's a representative from the governor's office. Apparently Ranger's story caught the attention of some pretty important people." Sophie's eyes widened further. "The governor knows about Max. I mean Ranger?" "Everyone knows about Ranger," Ryan assured her with a gentle smile. "And about the brave girl who saved him when no one else would." A knock at the door announced Patricia Thompson, elegant in a tailored suit and carrying a clipboard. "5 minutes, everyone," she informed them efficiently. "Sophie, you'll be introduced after the opening remarks. Just remember to speak clearly into the microphone and take your time." Sophie nodded solemnly, reaching down to draw strength from Ranger's solid presence. The German shepherd pressed against her side, seeming to sense her nervousness. "We'll be right there in the front row," Martha assured her, straightening Sophie's collar one last time. "Just look at us if you get nervous." As they filed out toward the main hall, Bill found himself overwhelmed by the transformation of the past month. The farm had settled back into its routine, with Ranger seamlessly integrating into their daily lives. The formal adoption papers had been processed, making Sophie his official owner, though everyone understood that Ranger had chosen his family long before any paperwork made it official. The Anderson farm had become something of a local attraction, with visitors often stopping by to meet the $5 hero and hear his story firsthand. Bill had initially worried about the attention, concerned it might trigger Sophie's trauma or disrupt their recovery, but to his surprise, she had blossomed under the gentle interest, proudly recounting how she had found Ranger and nursed him back to health. The community center fell silent as they entered, then erupted in applause. Ranger, true to his training, remained perfectly composed despite the noise and commotion. He walked at Sophie's side, matching his pace to hers, the picture of canine dignity. The program began with remarks from the police chief of Claiborne, who spoke movingly about the officers lost in the raid and the importance of canine units in law enforcement. He presented Ryan with a Medal of Valor, which the officer accepted with visible emotion. Then it was Sophie's turn. She approached the podium slowly, her small frame barely visible behind it, until Patricia discreetly placed a step stool for her to stand on. Ranger sat at perfect attention beside her, his presence visibly calming her nerves. "My name is Sophie Peterson," she began, her voice small but clear in the microphone. "And this is Max. Ranger. I still call him Max sometimes because that's the name I gave him when I found him." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "It was just a normal day when I saw him tied up at our neighbor's property. He was really skinny and scared and hurt, and the man said he was no good anymore. He said I could have him for $5. The audience was utterly silent. captivated by the child's simple, honest telling. $5 was all the money I had saved from helping Grandma gather eggs. But I knew he needed me, and maybe I needed him too. My mom and dad died 2 years ago, and sometimes I felt really alone. She glanced down at Ranger, drawing strength from his steady presence. I didn't know he was a police dog then. I just knew he was sad and hurt and needed someone to love him. Bill felt Martha's hand find his, squeezing tightly as they watched their granddaughter speak with a poise and maturity that belied her 10 years. Ranger taught me something really important, Sophie continued. He taught me that sometimes the most broken things are the most special, and sometimes people think something or someone isn't worth much, but they're wrong. She described the days of patiently earning Ranger's trust, of reading to him in the barn, of celebrating the first time he wagged his tail. She spoke of his gradual recovery, how he began to protect her, and how they discovered his true identity. When we found out he was a police dog, I was scared they would take him away, she admitted. But Officer Thompson, that's Ryan over there, he said Ranger could stay with us while he gets better from his own injuries. And now Ranger is officially retired and lives with us forever. Sophie's gaze found Bill and Martha in the front row, her smile widening. My grandpa says Ranger chose us for a reason. He says sometimes life brings you exactly what you need, even if it looks different than you expected. As Sophie concluded her speech, there wasn't a dry eye in the house. The applause was thunderous, people rising to their feet in a standing ovation. Ranger, sensing the completion of Sophie's task, gently nudged her hand with his nose, his signal that she had done well. The remainder of the program included a demonstration by the current K9 unit, showing the audience the incredible skills and training these dogs possessed. Ryan spoke briefly about his partnership with Ranger, sharing stories of their work together and the bond that had formed between them. Ranger saved my life the night of the raid, he said, his voice thick with emotion. And then, when he was injured and abandoned, the Peterson family saved his... There's a special poetry in that, the rescuer becoming the rescued. The event concluded with the announcement that over $50,000 had been raised for the K9 officers' medical fund, ensuring that retired police dogs would receive the care they needed throughout their lives. A portion would also go toward Ryan's continued rehabilitation. As the formal program ended and people began to mingle, enjoying refreshments and the chance to meet Ranger up close, Bill found himself approached by Harold Davis, the former police chief and uncle of one of the fallen officers. Your granddaughter, Harold said, shaking his head in wonder. She's something special, Bill. Reminds me why we did the job all those years. She is that, Bill agreed, watching as Sophie carefully showed a group of children how to properly greet Ranger, explaining that police dogs should be approached with respect. I wanted to let you know, Harold continued, lowering his voice, the prosecution has added conspiracy to commit murder charges against Miller and Dawson. The evidence from the USB drive and phone Ranger recovered was the tipping point. They're looking at life sentences, no possibility of parole. Bill nodded solemnly. Good. Those officers deserve justice. And they got it, thanks to that dog and your family. Harold clapped Bill on the shoulder. You did good, Anderson. In retirement, you might have done more good than in all our years on the force. As the crowd began to thin, Patricia approached with an elegant older woman Bill didn't recognize. Mr. Anderson, I'd like you to meet Mrs. Eleanor Barnett from the Woodrow Foundation. They've taken a special interest in Ranger's story. The woman extended a manicured hand. Mr. Anderson, it's a pleasure. Your family's story with Ranger has touched many hearts, including those of our board members. Bill shook her hand, puzzled by the introduction. Thank you, ma'am. Though I'm not sure what interest a foundation would have in our situation. Eleanor smiled warmly. The Woodrow Foundation supports education initiatives, Mr. Anderson. Specifically, programs that teach children empathy and compassion through animal relationships. She glanced toward Sophie, who was now demonstrating to an enraptured audience how Ranger could still perform his evidence-finding skills despite retirement. We believe your granddaughter and Ranger could be powerful ambassadors for our school outreach program. What exactly would that entail? Martha asked, joining the conversation. Visits to schools with Ranger, sharing his story and yours. Helping children understand the human-animal bond, the importance of compassion, the value of service. Eleanor reached into her purse and withdrew a business card. There would be compensation, of course, and all expenses covered. We found that children respond powerfully to stories told by other children, especially when accompanied by a dog as magnificent as Ranger. Bill and Martha exchanged glances, having a silent conversation in the way only couples married for decades can do. "We'd need to discuss it with Sophie," Bill said finally, "and with Ryan, since Ranger is still technically his partner, even in retirement." "Of course," Eleanor agreed readily. "Please take your time. The opportunity will remain open." As the community center emptied, the Anderson family and Ryan remained behind, helping the volunteers with cleanup. Sophie had finally succumbed to exhaustion, curled up on a row of chairs with Ranger vigilantly at her feet. "She was amazing today," Ryan remarked, watching the sleeping child, poise of someone twice her age. "She's had to grow up fast," Martha said softly, her eyes reflecting both pride and sadness. "Too fast, sometimes." "This foundation opportunity," Bill mused. "What do you think, Ryan? Would it be good for her? For Ranger?" Ryan considered the question thoughtfully. Ranger thrives on having a purpose. All working dogs do. Retirement can be hard for them. They're used to having jobs, to being needed. He glanced at the German Shepherd, who remained alert even as his young charge slept. And Sophie clearly has a gift for connecting with people, for telling their story in a way that resonates. "It would mean travel," Martha pointed out. "Time away from the farm, from school." "We could work around the school calendar," Bill suggested. "Summer visits, perhaps some weekends." "And the compensation would help with the farm expenses, maybe even start a college fund for Sophie." They fell silent, each contemplating the unexpected turn their lives had taken. From a simple act of childhood compassion, $5 spent on a dog no one wanted, had bloomed possibilities none of them could have imagined. "Well," Martha said finally, practical as always, "we don't need to decide tonight. Let's get our sleepyhead home and talk about it tomorrow." Bill gently lifted his granddaughter, her body limp with exhaustion. She stirred slightly, murmuring, "Did I do okay, Grandpa?" "You did beautifully, sweetheart," he assured her, his heart swelling with pride. "Absolutely beautifully." Ranger rose immediately, falling into step beside Bill as he carried Sophie to the truck. The German Shepherd's vigilance never wavered, his eyes scanning continuously for any potential threat to his young charge. The drive home was quiet, Sophie sleeping in the back seat with Ranger maintaining his protective watch. Bill found his thoughts drifting to the future, the Foundation's offer, the upcoming trials, the continued recovery of their family from the trauma they had endured. "Penny for your thoughts," Martha said softly, reaching across to touch his hand on the steering wheel. Bill smiled in the darkness. "Just thinking about how life takes unexpected turns. A year ago we were just trying to keep the farm afloat, worrying about Sophie adjusting after losing her parents. Now we've got a retired police dog, national attention, and potentially a new purpose none of us saw coming. All because Sophie had $5 and a big heart," Martha mused. As they turned onto the long driveway leading to the farmhouse, the headlights illuminated the old oak tree where Ranger had first unearthed the police badge, the beginning of their extraordinary journey. The tree stood tall against the night sky, a silent witness to all that had transpired. In the back seat, Sophie stirred again, her hand automatically reaching for Ranger's reassuring presence. "Home?" she murmured sleepily. "Yes, sweetheart," Bill confirmed, his voice thick with emotion. "We're home." And in that moment, Bill Anderson knew with absolute certainty that whatever challenges lay ahead, whatever path they chose to follow with the Foundation's offer, they would face it together, as a family made stronger and more complete by the addition of a remarkable dog who had once been deemed worthless. $5. The thought still amazed him. $5 had changed everything. As Bill carried his sleeping granddaughter into the house, Ranger trotting faithfully at his side, he was struck by a profound sense of gratitude for Sophie's compassionate heart, for Ranger's unwavering loyalty, for second chances and new beginnings. Some might call it coincidence that Sophie had found Ranger, that he had led them to evidence that would bring justice, that their paths had crossed with Ryan's at exactly the right moment. But Bill preferred to see it as something more meaningful. A reminder that even in a world where people like Frank Miller existed, where corruption and cruelty sometimes seemed to prevail, there remained the possibility of redemption, of healing, of justice. And sometimes that possibility began with a child's simple act of kindness, $5 spent on a broken dog that nobody wanted. When Sophie Peterson spent her last $5 on an injured German shepherd that no one wanted, she couldn't have known she was purchasing far more than a pet. This extraordinary story reminds us that life's most meaningful moments often come disguised as small choices. Like Sophie, many of us have felt the quiet grief of loss and the uncertainty that follows. We've wondered if our best days are behind us. But Ranger's journey shows us that value exists where others see only damage, that purpose can find us when we least expect it, and that healing happens in the company of those who simply refuse to give up on us. In our golden years, we've learned that the most precious gifts aren't the ones with hefty price tags, but the relationships that sustain us through life's storms. The unbreakable bond between a child and her dog, the reconnection of a community around a common cause, the discovery that our experience and wisdom still matter, these are the treasures no amount of money can buy. What $5 miracle has changed your life in ways you never expected? Has an animal's loyalty ever taught you something profound about what really matters? Share your stories in the comments below. We all have a Ranger in our lives. Who was yours?